Good afternoon. I'm Lynn Delaney, Executive Director of RFK Human Rights. Welcome to our November Book Club. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to Nisa Patel and Belina Pristina for organizing. If you enjoyed today's program, please follow us on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Threads, TikTok, and X for more information on our work. In celebration of Senator Robert Kennedy's 100th birthday this week, today we're delighted to welcome our president, Kerry Kennedy, and author Chris Matthews in conversation about his latest book, Lessons from Bobby, 10 Reasons Robert F. Kennedy Still Matters. There will be time for questions following the discussion.
Thank you. Where are you going?
Kerry is the proud mother of 3 daughters, a human rights activist and lawyer. She authored New York Times bestseller Being Catholic Now, as well as Speak Truth to Power and Robert F. Kennedy, Ripples of Hope. Kerry has devoted 40-plus years to the pursuit of equal justice, the promotion and protection of basic rights, and the preservation of the rule of law. She's led hundreds of human rights delegations to support these causes. She served as chair of the Amnesty International USA Leadership Council for over a decade. She's on the board of directors of the United States Institute of Peace and on the advisory committees for the Association of American Indian Affairs, the Albert Schweitzer Institute, the Center for Victims of Torture, as well as the advisory council for the New York University Stern Center for Business and Human Rights. Among many honors, Kerry has also received the Humanitarian Award from the Congress of Nobel Peace Prize laureates. She's a graduate of Brown University and Boston College Law. Go Eagles! Our very special guest today is Chris Matthews. Chris is an American political commentator, the retired talk show host of Hardball, and the author of 8 best-selling books. This is his second book about Robert Kennedy. A former print journalist and syndicated columnist, he witnessed history in the making by covering the fall of the Berlin Wall, the first democratic elections in South Africa, and the Good Friday peace talks. As a Hill staffer, Chris worked for 4 members of Congress, including as chief of staff to then Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill. But his very first foray to Capitol Hill was as a Capitol Hill police officer. Chris was a Peace Corps volunteer, and he is a graduate of the College of the Holy Cross, yay Crusaders, and he holds 34 honorary degrees. Please welcome Kerry Kennedy and Chris Matthews.
Thank you so much, Lynn. And Chris, so great to be with you. And I want to thank all of the people who are joining us today at the RFK Book Club. Really appreciate everyone coming. And there will be time for questions, so please put them into the question box right on your screen. So Chris, let's just start right away. You've talked about my father so much. You've written 2 books about him. You've written about Uncle Jack as well. What was it about him, about Daddy, that really grabbed you, that captured your imagination?
Well, I think it was gradual with me. Like a lot of people, I didn't fully understand the role that he played in the Jack Kennedy's career. It was extraordinary. I read Kenny O'Donnell's memoirs about the beginnings of the 1952 Senate race against Henry Cabot Lodge. Bobby won that race. He really did it. He put it together. He organized it. If he hadn't done it, it wouldn't have worked. It was a tough campaign against a good opponent, Henry Cabot Lodge. It wasn't some bum that they were running against. It was a serious statesman. And then the 60 campaign, and it's so clearly that he put that campaign together as well. And then all the civil rights work that he did with the University of Mississippi and the University of Alabama, and pushing his brother to give the famous June 1963 address for civil rights that Martin Luther King said, that white man hit the ball out of the park. That was an extraordinary worded speech. And to think about how it was put together at the last minute. And also what he did in the Cuban Missile Crisis is extraordinary. Going from a hawk to being a dove and figuring out how they had to put together the deal with Khrushchev. And they avoided a world war. They avoided a nuclear war, probably. And all through it, it was impossible to imagine Jack without Bobby. And that whole heroic period would not have happened without him. And I think Jack would have been the first to admit that, say that.
I think, I love that description, and it's a broad swath of his life. So many people, and you included, say that he changed so much.
Yes.
Do you see that as an evolution, or do you think it was the dramatic moment of his brother's death?
There are a lot of accounts that would carry about that, about what made him a passionate civil rights advocate, not just doing the right thing. A lot of what he did was court ordered, federal court ordered. It was federal courts that said you have to desegregate bus lines, interstate bus lines, the Freedom Riders. He got court orders in terms of Ole Miss. He had to go to war with Governor Bross Barnett, who was a real segregationist, who believed, he said that James Meredith, that boy, he said that word, that boy is not going to Ole Miss. I mean, it's hard to believe when you think about it. Those universities in the South, just look at the football teams playing tomorrow. They're integrated. Those schools are integrated now. They used to be entirely all white. And it's hard to believe that a major university in big states, totally white, just the 15, 20% of those states that were African-American, were not allowed to go to those schools. It's just incredible, including James Meredith. The issue that some people point to as really determinant in terms of his development, your dad's development, was John Siegenthaler was his administrative assistant when he was Attorney General. And he sent him to go join the Freedom Riders heading into Alabama in 1961. And he was basically there as an observer, not an activist. But he was attacked by the white crowd. And when he said he was from the federal government, that was just the end of it. That's when they really went after. They hammered his head with some sort of metal object. And he's lying on this is John Siegenthaler, the former future editor of the Nashville Tennessean. And his head lying on the ground, bleeding. And the cops just the local cops just said, let him lie there. And he was lying there for like a half hour. And finally, they picked him up and took him to the hospital. That's when Harry Belafonte and John Lewis said that was the awakening of Bobby Kennedy. That when somebody close to him, a personal friend, an associate, when he got beat up by that white crowd, Bobby recognized that he's up against evil and he had to take it on. And so some of it was that. It was also the James Baldwin meeting. He agreed to meet, he signed up with a bunch of African-American intellectuals in New York City. Your family had an apartment on Central Park South. And these are all the most enlightened, the most intellectual African-Americans around James Baldwin and Lena Horne and people like that. And finally, during the meeting, Bobby's listening to all of them tell moderate African-American thinking. They were all well, successful people. And finally, a young guy who had been a freedom rider spoke up and said, if they tried to draft me right now, I would pull a gun. And Bobby just said, oh, this guy's so unpatriotic. How can that be? And then he went home and he thought about it for a few days. And he said, if I were that kid, I'd be thinking just like him. So some of it was experiential, evolutionary, in seeing the white angry crowds in the South, seeing the courage of the Freedom Riders. It was knowing people like Belafonte and John Lewis. And it all evolved until by 1968, when King was killed, Bobby was ready to take on the reality of life. And you had that experience. You were young, but you were there, Kerry. You were with him when the Washington went up in flames. And when he spoke to the African-American crowd in Indianapolis and the Ripples of Hope speech, he developed over time to a person who somehow felt the suffering of the people whose rights were being denied. And everybody said that about him. He was not some limousine liberal pretending to be concerned. He somehow felt the horrible depression of minorities. And it was real. That's all I know. He once said, and I have to be careful how I say this, but I can say it to the book club people. He said, before I was Attorney General, I didn't lose much sleep over Negroes and their plight. It didn't affect him, but he developed through experience into a guy who really cared. It was for real.
Yeah, it's interesting. Okay, let's talk about the ground rules here. Do you want this to be a discussion, or do you want me to just ask you questions?
You tell me what you want. I'll be giving you long. I think what you're saying there with a little edge is my answers are too long.
No, here's the thing.
I'll shorten them.
That, I think he did go through a transformation, but I think there's kind of this myth, which Harry Belafonte describes. Harry said, well, we knew that he worked for Joe McCarthy, and we knew that we saw him on television going after the union bosses, and we just knew that he was this tough, aggressive guy who didn't really care about people. And then he was introduced to the Freedom Riders and he started to care. And I think that Harry didn't know him and King didn't know him. But in fact, he did change and he evolved, but he was like the scrawniest little brother of these big, hulking, handsome guys who got a lot of attention. He was, since he was a little kid, he was always on the side of the bullies. When he was in college, he refused to, and then got the rest of the football squad to refuse to stay at away games at hotels which wouldn't allow the black kids on the squad to be with him. As you point out in the book, he invited Ralph Bunche to the University of Virginia, which was not integrated at that time, and he integrated the law school at UVA, and whenever that was, 1950, 1951. So it's not, he did say that about himself, but it's not quite totally accurate.
Well, I think you're right. I mean,
he was always like one of his, Jeff Greenfield, who was his aide, said you could wrap up his life in the phrase, get your boot off his neck. Yeah. And so as soon as he saw somebody who was being bullied, he was on the side of the bullied person.
I think you're right. And there are strains of that going back to that poet priest in Cambridge, who said there's no faith outside the church. And he took the side of the people who are not Catholic. And he said, I don't accept this thing about
Feeney.
Yeah, Feeney. And I thought, I remember my grade school nuns at St. Christopher's in Philadelphia telling and crossing out that page, don't read that poetry from Feeney. I mean, the word had gotten around about his manners and his thinking. I think about Ralph Bunche, when your mom and your dad took Bunche to, not only did he insist that he speak to a integrated crowd, and all a white and black crowd together, which was basically against the law in Virginia during Jim Crow. But they took him home at night because he couldn't stay anywhere. And Ralph Bunche was staying all night with them. And all the night there's rocks being thrown at the windows, which is pretty scary in 1950, in the early 1950s. I think it's, you're right. It's not black and white. It's not went from, and by the way, when I studied what he did with Joe McCarthy, and I know there was a family connection and they're all Irish and everything. I know this completely from my background. And what he did was really good investigations of what the British were doing and how they were basically arming the enemy in Korea against their own troops. And I go, that's really good work. And Doris Fleeson, the columnist, said that was the best work the McCarthy committee ever did. So it wasn't like he was part of the good squad.
The McCarthy committee.
He wasn't one of the bad guys. He was trying to do the good stuff.
Yeah.
And I understand entirely his loyalty to Joe. As Jack Newfield, the great columnist in New York, who wrote great stuff about Bobby, said, it'd be like a Jewish kid joining the Communist Party in the 1930s for Bobby to go work for Joe McCarthy. It made perfect sense. Because my mom was, I'd come home in 1954. I'm older than you. I would come home from school, and guess what? The TV was on. And what do you think Mom was watching? Well, she wasn't rooting for the Army. She was rooting for McCarthy, clearly, And Kenny O'Donnell talked about being at the Bellevue Hotel next to the State House in Boston, and all the Irish guys were there rooting for Roy Cohn against Bobby. They were with McCarthy in the 54 hearings, the Army of McCarthy hearings. So it was very ethnic in those days, very Irish, very tribal. That's what it was. I'm sorry. That's what it was. And people took sides. And, my mom was on that side. My dad, a moderate guy, would always say McCarthy went too far. He was drunk, too. The other thing, he's always drunk. He was terrible. I mean, he died drunk. And I did appreciate the fact that your dad went to the funeral in Appleton in Wisconsin and didn't want anybody to know he was there, but he did go out of respect. And Jack Kennedy, as president in 1962, told Ben Bradley, the great newspaperman, that his brother was so loyal that he was loyal to McCarthy, even when he was in total disrepute in the country politically, that he stuck with him with the funeral. He also was great in getting the POW or the Cuban POWs freed after the Bay of Pigs. I mean, looking out for those people that nobody else looked out for. I can tell you, nobody cared about those people, and he cared about them to the last man.
Yeah, exactly. So there's that empathy coming up. Is there any political, when you think about Daddy's strength as somebody who reached out to large crowds? I'm not talking about as an operative right now. I'm talking about as a leader. Is who in the last, I don't know, in the last 10 years does
oh my God.
Like that at all?
I've been asked that question, Kerry, for the last 2 weeks. I think of Democrats, I read this book on Mitt Romney. He has flaws. I would have accepted him in a minute in the last year's election. I would have said, give me Mitt Romney. Get the other guys out of the race. Everybody has a little of empathy. You think about them. Some people are not that empathetic. They're, people like Jerry Brown are smart as hell, but they're not exactly empathetic. It's hard to find. That's a hard answer. I think we don't have a lot of empathy today, and I think about the smart questions we should be asking of ourselves about immigration, and people don't seem to be concerned about the border being closed since January 20th. They hate the way the deportation thing's being handled. They wouldn't mind if criminals were sent out of the country, but the random nature of just going after people that have been leading quiet lives, or paying taxes and paying into Social Security, even though they don't get any benefits from it, and Medicaid. But
yeah,
I guess the Pope. I mean, I can see where, I certainly think Christian Catholic nuns are always the best people. My mom's two sisters were nuns, St. Joseph nuns, and I believe in them completely. I didn't particularly like the nuns I had in school, but I really liked the ones that I had in my family. And they're very nice when they got old, and they're all Democrats, which is very strange, but they are all Democrats. The bishops are all Republicans, yes. Especially the cardinals. and President Kennedy always knew that. But he'd always say, if you saw the nuns in the crowd with their habits on, he would say, count the nuns and multiply by 10 or something like that. What was good with nuns was Tip O'Neill, my boss for 6 years. I mean, he once met my Aunt Eleanor when she showed up the lobby for social business, and he said, "How you doing, dear? How long you been out of the habit?" which is his friend. How long you been out of the habit? And they always know immediately what day they could took that thing off of theirs, didn't have to wear it anymore. But I don't know. I think
I mean, I have
empathy is
to say,
empathy is not common. It just isn't.
I think I think it's interesting. I think in a lot of ways, Obama in his first race was able to bring together a coalition that was not dissimilar to Daddy's, black and white, old and young.
Yeah, you're right.
I think that in terms of kind of passion for people who are suffering, I think of Cory Booker, his speeches are really right in the
You're
middle
right.
of that. And then I think of people who are driven by their Catholic sort of social justice roots. I think Nancy Pelosi ultimately is like that. When somebody said, "Do you hate Trump?" and she said, "No, I don't hate him. I pray for him." That was just such a profound moment. And I also think someone like Van Jones, who's very politically sophisticated, but also leads from a goodness of heart that sort of is calling us to our better selves, which is what I think Daddy and Martin Luther King and Jack, all did. They were so appealing, not because of their policies so much, but because they appealed to our best selves, and that made us feel like we could be our best selves, and then we'd be our best nation. What do you think of that?
I think you're right about Cory Booker, and his speeches are aspirational, and they're very genuine. I think you've gotten me thinking now. I think Bobby Casey, the former senator from Pennsylvania, was a really good, empathetic person. He didn't have a lot of money in politics today. I think that's his problem. He couldn't last. I think Harris Wofford was a good guy, a really good guy. I knew him
really
pretty
good
well. He was the civil rights advocate for President Kennedy, and he continued that way as a U.S. senator, a surprising U.S. senator, that he was able to be elected. These are quietly successful people at advocating for people in trouble. It's good, something I should think more about. Who is good? I'm so much into the hardball aspect of politics that I want to know who's winning the fight, and who should be losing it. I think the Democrats are going to pick up 30 seats this next year. We'll see. I mean, I think it's Kerry, there's a what's the right word? There's a change year and there's a hold year. After Reagan was president for 2 terms, George Bush benefited from a hold year. They didn't want to change. They wanted more Reagan. And he got elected. There's a change year. Jimmy Carter was certainly a change year in 1980. People wanted a change. They wanted a big change in 1976 too. So when the word is out that we want to have a change, look out if you're an incumbent. And what Trump doesn't want to realize is he's an incumbent. For all his life attacking the establishment, he's an incumbent now. It's his responsibility if prices go up, and they continue to be a problem. People that have an affordability problem. It's a real thing. My daughter wants to have a second baby. Well, you can't have a second baby in Brooklyn. You can't live in certain places anymore. They're too expensive, and you have to move you have to find some place to live, and that's for middle class people. This is a reality, and Trump is going to face reality next year.
Well, we'll see what happens. As the head of a nonprofit organization, I am, of course, nonpartisan, as you know, Chris. But we're doing our best. Is there a story about Robert Kennedy, big or small, that you think captures who he really was behind the scenes?
I think you got to it in your own stories, which is how he came up as a kid. I think that helped turn him in the direction of looking out for people. He was not as tall as his brothers, Jack and Joe Jr. and Teddy. He was not as potentially athletic, although he was a jock. He wasn't as handsome, I could argue, or it could be said, as his beautiful brothers. His father referred to him as the runt of the litter, which is brutal to say to a son or a daughter or anybody. But, you know, he talked about being Irish, and he gave a great speech up in Scranton after Jack was killed. And he was talking about the Queen Victoria giving like $5 to the Irish fund. And I said, well, that's a good story. That's very tribal. That's a point of view story that was very funny. And that's a real Irish town. Scranton is like the last Irish town. And he
home of Joe Biden.
Yeah, well, it
His
really
birthday,
is.
Who shares Daddy's birthday, incidentally.
Yeah. I think that's a great question about his personal, I guess his story about Jack is, I told you, or reminded you of all the things he did, of course, but when his brother was killed, Chuck Spaulding told the story of going over to the Lincoln bedroom in the White House and listening at the door to your father inside the door, basically praying at the same time he was complaining. And he was saying, why, when things were going so well, would this happen? How could this happen? He couldn't connect it with his beliefs all those years up to then of his. It didn't clarify, and it didn't make any sense to him what had happened in Dallas. And I think a lot of that was still working out in his head in 1968 when King was killed. This, how do you rectify, justify horror when you're doing the right thing? When your life is all aimed at the right thing, and all of a sudden the worst thing in the world happens, a brutal murder, which is always brutal, and all of a sudden it's just blown away. Your life is really blown away, and your values are blown away. And it's just, I think that explains a lot about him and how he had to adjust, if he could adjust to that, which he was still trying to do in 1964 at the Democratic Convention, where he sat on the fire escape after he gave that incredible speech about your uncle, Uncle Jack. And he's sitting out in the steps in this horrible part of the building of the Atlantic City Convention Hall, like the third floor down in the basement. And he's sitting out on the fire escape crying because of the situation he was in, which was talking about his dead brother and how that could have happened. And of course, he was still unable to say what happened in Dallas. He referred to it as a member of his family being killed several years ago, and he was talking about Jack. It was very hard for him to say the words, and I think that's something that, you know, a lot of us were. My life was changed completely by Jack being killed, and I can only imagine what it would be like to have devoted your life to him, as Bobby did, your dad did, and to have it all thrown away. I think that explains Ted Kennedy too in some ways. Nothing that explains anybody completely, but the sense of having 3 of your brothers killed in national service is too stunning a reality, I think, for most people to Alan Simpson, a great senator from Wyoming, and he was a great guy. He said if anybody else was Ted Kennedy, he'd be sitting in an empty room, sitting in a chair crying. Because he wouldn't be able to deal with life. It was too much for him. And you knew your Uncle Ted, and the tragedy was so complete.
Well, I think it's interesting first of all, Daddy lost his best friend and his partner. They were really partners in such profound way in that presidency. Of course, Jack was the president, but they really worked hand in hand together over all the big issues. When Jack died, it was his brother, his partner, the man who knew him best, whose sentences he could complete. It was his president. It was his job. It was the jobs of everybody around him. Everybody lost their job on the same day. That has a profound impact. Yeah. Especially on men, especially in the 1960s. What are you going to do? Your future is you're not only of the country and you personally. What's going to happen to your family? And it's not just you, it's everybody you know. So yeah. It was a colossal event. The thing that my mother said, well, my father's asked about this, about his change, and he said, I've always worked for someone else. And so I was in that mode. Kerry would use that you're confined because you're trying to advance somebody else. But then suddenly he was free. And he also, my mother said that he was kind of released. The way she said it is after Jack died, he said, to heck with it. I'm just going to go out and represent the people who I know are suffering the most in this country and around the world. And that's what I'm going to do with my life. So it's like this moment almost of freedom in a way. Yeah. Saying, now I can do this. Let's talk. And part of that was his trip to South Africa, which remains one of the most moral moments in the 20th century. He didn't need to go to South Africa. Most Americans had never heard of apartheid. But he was asked by Ian Robertson, and he went and he gave that extraordinary speech on democracy and on change and the capacity of an individual to make a difference. What do you think he understood about that moment in history that others didn't?
Well, he was going to a different country. He was talking to different people, white people in South Africa. I think there was a measure of moral humility in addressing another culture, another world, where about that time I was over there. I went to Swaziland, the Peace Corps. So I knew that I listened to South African radio.
When were you there in the Peace Corps?
I was there in 68 through 71. And I would listen to...
There 2 years later.
Yeah, I would. It was still the country. It was still apartheid.
Yeah.
And there was still no television. They thought television would liberate the country. They didn't want that. I listened. It's a strange society because part of it was highly sophisticated. Dr. Christian Bernard was doing heart transplants. At the same time, they were monitoring and policing interracial relations, black and white relations. They didn't want anybody getting married with each other. They didn't want any kind of integration going on. And they were very strict on that stuff. The morality laws, they called them. So it was a conflicted society. And what Bobby did when he came in was he gave a speech which sounded like he was talking about South Africa, but he was really talking about America, about a country settled by the Dutch. The British overran the Dutch. Eventually, the country became independent, but it still had racial troubles. And he said, I'm talking, of course, about the United States. And the audience goes, wow, we thought he was talking about us. And then he goes, every country has to solve its own history in its own way. So he said, I'm not here to dictate. But he did say that individuals can make a difference. As you say, the Ripples of Hope speech was what it was about. Individuals can step forth, whether it's Thomas Jefferson or who it is, or the people fighting the Nazis in Europe in the 1940s, that individuals can eventually make an ultimate reality. Certainly, Nelson Mandela did with 28 years in prison. But I think he was talking to him with a humble way of saying, I've come here to help you with some advice that's moral, but I'm not here to dictate or to tell you that I'm right and you're wrong. It was a great, isn't that next year, 60 years anniversary?
Yes,
There?
66. Yep.
Yeah.
66 to 2026.
People still talk about it over there, as you know.
I went on the 50th anniversary with 30 of our family members, and we retraced all the steps, and it was really one of the most extraordinary journeys, profound understanding of both South Africa, the United States, and my dad and my mom. It was really quite wonderful. Chris, we're asking for questions from the audience. So we've got a big audience here. I hope everybody will ask. And I'm going to start with this one from Bill Arnon. Bill, of course, worked for Daddy in '68 and is such a great friend of our families. So he's asking a very good question. He says, RFK made audiences uncomfortable with his candor and his challenges to complacency. He never pandered. Could he be elected in today's political environment?
Well, he had a habit of going to like schools like University of Notre Dame and saying, I know you kids don't like the draft, but should we only draft poor people that can't afford college? And he stuck it to them. Yeah, I think that was a way of killing the snootiness, moral snootiness of the audience. He would stick it to them. Yeah, I think I was very sensitive because I was facing the draft.
Would that work today in today's environment?
Nothing works today. Nothing works today. We are so divided.
Trump works.
It's on both sides. People want to. You don't want to talk politics. I understand you are nonpartisan, but I'll tell you, you turn on MS Now, formerly MSNBC. And you can't even, the answers to all the questions are, I agree with you completely. This is the answer to most questions. I agree with you completely. There's no discussion, no nuance of difference. CNN's a little different. They sometimes have Republicans on. They a little bit of difference, but then you go to full pander on the other side, where people do not turn on the news to learn the news. They turn on the news to have their feelings and thoughts confirmed. The reason they watch the news is to confirm their opinions. And they act like they're getting news. They don't want news. They don't want a conflict. They don't want a little discussion.
Where do you go for actual news?
C-SPAN, I mean, PBS.
Come on, you can't say that.
I know. I would think NPR sometimes. I remember Walter Cronkite was a liberal. I mean, you tell me he was a liberal. He wanted your dad to run for president. I found out that from Frank Mankiewicz. But he didn't advertise it. My older brother was a moderate Republican, and he would say, I like Cronkite because he's the best. But people don't want to hear any discordance. We're a very shaky society right now. I think, well, we'll see. I mean, I hope we can find a really good election in 28 with what I would call a moderate Democrat, a governor of some kind, and actually find ourselves in a battle with J.D. Harris or anybody, and have a real election. I'd like to see a real Nixon-Kennedy election, an election that's somewhere near the center, but I don't know if it's in the prospect right now.
Yeah. George Friedenberg is asking, how does Senator Robert Kennedy's legacy still matter today?
I think the key theme. Well, thank you, George. I'm seeing you managed to get through the queue. I would say, if you want a great country, we should try at our best to be a good country.
Yeah.
I think if you just go through the whole line of what Bobby did, helping his brother get elected president, fighting for civil rights, really did fight, and avoiding a nuclear war, really getting into that, and then eventually coming out against the Vietnam War in a way that made perfect sense. We have to have some kind of coalition over there, something like Laos. I mean, I think if you're just good, I think that's the message here, and obviously you can always do the right thing. And we can do the right thing. We got to end up the war in Ukraine. We got to end that war pretty soon. I mean, that's what's going on in Kiev is horrible. The bombing is terrible. We have to find a way to end it, and to truly end the Middle East war between Israel and Gaza. There should be a full effort by our president, the leader of the world, to end those wars and stop dilly-dallying about it, because these people are getting killed every day, and I would think we should be the world leader we used to be. We did under Eisenhower and Kennedy, where we were the world leaders, and Reagan too. I think we should go back to being the leader, and that means ending these wars. Yes,
ending these wars and supporting international institutions like the UN and NATO and
I don't think Dick Cheney was good on ending wars. I think he started a war.
Yes.
So we've had leaders that do the wrong stuff too.
Yes, we have. We certainly have. Well, Chris, just as a final question, RFK Human Rights has 50 people working there. I would say all but 10 of them are under 40, no, over 40. Anyway, they're all between 20 and 40 years old.
Good for you.
And they work at RFK Human Rights. They mostly are, trying to stop governments from abusing rights in our country and around the world. What is it important? The 2 or 3 things that you would want them to know about Bobby Kennedy as they're carrying forward his unfinished work. What is it that they need to know about him?
Well, I think my book's got 4 or 5. I'll just 2 or 3. Unity, trying to heal the divisions in the country, and certainly he managed to, at his death, had united working class white people and black people and Hispanic people, of course, and American Indians, American indigenous people. I mean, that was all real, and one didn't seem to come out against the other. It wasn't like his concern for blacks and Hispanics in California offended white people. He found a way to unite both sides, and he did. So I could give you all the examples of how he did that. He made sure he did it. I think courage is another thing. I think a lot of people have just simple guts. We have to have a democracy in our country before we talk about anything in the rest of the world. We have to have an independent Senate, an independent U.S. House of Representatives. We have to have people willing to stand up and not just be robots for this president, where on a Sunday morning, they're against disclosing files on Epstein, and Sunday night, they switch a row 100% the way the president wanted to do. I think there's that robotic, the willingness to accept mistakes is a big part of Bobby. Hang a lantern on your problem, he called it. The willingness to go out and say, you know, I wasn't so great on civil rights growing up, but now I'm into it and I believe in it and I am for it and I've changed. I thought I was going to bomb a bunch of Russians in Cuba, but I think that was a bad decision. We would have started a war in Berlin and we would have gone to global war. I think that was the bad decision. He changed on that. Vietnam, another case. He was always being in the process of growing, of learning. And the last one, and this is directly against Trump, I'll admit it. You got to admit you lose an election. I mean, even at the Oregon primary was a heartbreaker for your dad, but he went right out in front of the public and said, I lost. Gene McCarthy beat me. Pat Buchanan was in the audience and he said that was the greatest speech. He said that guy looked better in defeat than he would in victory. I mean, being able to just belly up, walk to the camera, get on television and tell your own people you lost. It wasn't a crooked election. It wasn't stolen. You lost. And I think that's an essential part of what we are in the world. And if we can't be truly democratic and support defeat, we don't have much to say to the rest of the world.
Yeah. Well, this is really wonderful, Chris. Such a treat always to see you. Thank you for this fabulous book. Anybody who has, I know you all have it because we sent it to you.
Thank you.
But it's a quick read. It's a page turner. I love also that you included all the speeches in the back. The speech when Martin Luther King died, of course, is so extraordinary. But the problem with that speech is because it was so great, people are not as familiar with the speech that he gave the next day, which is really quite extraordinary. And you've included it, The Mindless Menace of Violence at the Cleveland City Club. So everybody read Chris's book, read those speeches. We want to hear more from you. We're so delighted you joined us. And back to our executive director, Lynn Delaney.
Thank you, Kerry. And thank you, Chris. That was a really terrific discussion, and it could not be more timely or more needed. We hope everyone leaves inspired to make a difference, and that Chris's book is on your holiday gift list. Like its subject matter, it's not huge in size, but you'll find it filled with vision, compassion, and inspiration. And we hope you'll all check out our social media. And when you do, please consider making a contribution in honor of Bobby Kennedy's centennial year. Thank you all very much. We hope to see you at our next book club.
Thanks, Lynn.
Thanks, Kerry.